Okay. So were we speaking from there?
Next or Celeste next?
I start off.
Well, we talk together a lot.
Yeah.
So we'll both stand up there.
Did you bring some sparkling water?
It's all
It's all good. Okay, that's all right.
Okay, if everyone can sit down. We'll get started in just a minute. I just want to welcome everybody and thank you so much for being here. And thank you to our fearless chair, Lori Barrett, for supporting this and making this happen. And for Christine Mott and Elizabeth Freyer for helping me with my little subcommittee. Thank you all for being here. I think it's probably safe to say that everyone here, at least almost everyone here, loves dogs. You may be an advocate, you may be a trainer, you may treat dogs, you may foster dogs, you may own a dog or two or three. And if you're anything like me, it's hard for you to walk down the street without stopping to say hello to every dog that you see, which can be problematic. So I always have to allow more time from wherever I need to go to say hello to all the dogs on the way. And whenever I'm anxious, if my little 6-pound deaf min pin jumps into my lap, I relax right away. And there's a good reason for that, and you'll hear a lot more about this, but according to overwhelming scientific evidence, dogs can really significantly reduce pain, anxiety, depression, fatigue in humans. So the title of the session is Making Our Justice System More Humane. Now that's not to say that it's inhumane, but court proceedings, as most of you know, because most of you are lawyers, court proceedings can be really tense. And Courthouse Dogs provide a calming, tension-reducing influence. And you'll learn from our speakers that these dogs are professionally trained to help vulnerable witnesses, provide emotional support to participants in family court proceedings, and to defendants in some courts. Courthouse facility dogs are neutral. It's their job to just bring a positive energy to the proceedings. So we're fortunate to have here with us today Ellen O'Neill-Stevens. She's the founder of the Courthouse Dogs Foundation, and Celeste Walsen is its executive director. And they're going to talk about the training these dogs undergo and the legal aspects surrounding the use of working facility dogs. I don't want to take the time to recite their impressive bios to you because I think you'd rather hear from them. So without further ado, please welcome Ellen O'Neill-Stevens and Celeste Walsen, and of course, the lovely, gentle, hardworking, and professional Molly.
Do I want this?
You do
So,
want to be able to change things.
Sometimes people say this is the Ellen and Celeste show. So we kind of go back and forth and politely interrupt one another and remind one another if we've left something out. So this will be a very, very informal session. We would like to know a little bit about you before we begin, about your interest in being here, and if you are involved in any legal field where you think these dogs could be of a benefit. So anybody want to volunteer information about that? You were shaking your head, yes.
Yes, I'll volunteer. My name's Lauren. I work in Brooklyn Family Court and the Integrated Domestic Violence Court, representing children in custody cases and various family court cases. And I would love to see these courthouse dogs and facility dogs in my work. I actually attended your conference this past September in Bellevue, and it was great. And we've been trying to talk to my agency about what we can do and encourage other agencies and actors in the family court to consider expanding into that arena.
Okay. Anybody else? You're saying yes, or you approve?
Well, I do not work in my day job in this capacity. I am an attorney but to corporate law, but I'm very interested, and my colleagues and other members of the Animal Law Committee have done a lot of work on the link between animal cruelty and other forms of violence. So I think it's great seeing how they can also bring positive energy and influence. So
Okay, great.
I'm really glad you're here, and also maybe for some of the other animal law people, because one thing we think is that when the public sees dogs in the courthouse helping vulnerable people, it raises the status of all dogs, because it opens their eyes to the capabilities.
Yes?
Hi, I'm Nikki. I'm a prosecutor in Queens, and I'm interested in obtaining for our office a facility dog, so I'm very interested in the topic.
We'll be going into that, on how you go about that. And before we introduce ourselves, let's introduce our esteemed guest here, Dr. David Crenshaw, who really brought this to New York State. So David, just stand up and tell them a little bit about yourself and how you got involved, and you're now on our advisory board.
Okay, it was really by accident. I work at the Children's Home of Poughkeepsie, which has been around since 1847. I always joke with people 16 years before Lincoln was elected president. But in 2010, we had an adolescent girl come into our program who had been severely sexually traumatized, beginning at age 11 through age 15. She was repeatedly raped, and she had to have 3 abortions as a result of these rapes. And so the story was so awful, she could barely talk about this with her therapist that she had been working with for over a year. So we knew she would not be able to go into court and be on the witness stand and to testify. And just coincidentally, I attended a conference in Louisville, Association for Play Therapy conference, and they were talking in one of the workshops about, in some states, these highly trained dogs were being used to go with kids on the stand and provide comfort as they testified. So I thought this was a fabulous idea. I brought it back to Dutchess County, talked to our district attorney. He had never heard of the idea, but fortunately he was very open to it. And so they found no precedent in New York State history of this ever being done. But they were willing to petition the court for permission for the dog to be in the trial. So Rosie, an 11-year-old golden retriever at the time, was on the stand with Jessica for over an hour and 15 minutes. And she was able to fully testify. We got the conviction, and then it went to the appellate court. The defense attorneys appealed because they thought the dog curried favor or sympathy from the jury, even though the judge was very careful to give instructions so that the jury never actually saw the dog. The dog was brought in before the jury was seated, and the jury was given a break, and then the dog was taken out. So they never actually saw the dog. It took 16 months to get a decision from the appellate court, but it was worth waiting because it was unanimous, and they said not only did they approve of the practice, they regarded it as a best practice in terms of providing accommodations to children. And then it was sent up to the Court of Appeals, is that right? And they looked at it for about a year and decided there was nothing for them to review. So basically that just affirmed the appellate court decision as I understand it. So we got strong case law in New York, and recently, in the past year, I've had the dog we use now, Ace, involved in 2 sexual abuse trials in family court. So we've kind of broken that ground also.
Was it limited to children?
Up to age 17, I think, well, yeah, actually, that was what.
Well, we'll be getting
Yeah,
into all
you'll
of the
talk about
details.
that.
Okay.
We proposed a law called Rosie's Law, but it never got anywhere because they thought the case law was so strong, they didn't want the legislators messing with it. So they were afraid they'd end up with something weaker.
Okay, so, well, thank you so much, David. We're so glad that you made the trip here for our presentation. So, this is Courthouse Dogs Foundation.
Yes.
I'm Ellen O'Meal Stevens, and I was a deputy prosecuting attorney for 26 years, and decided to create this nonprofit with my good friend Celeste Walsen. And Celeste, what do you bring here?
Yes, I'm Celeste, and I'm a veterinarian, and so Ellen is courthouse, and I'm dogs. So in the next while, she's going to be talking about all the legal aspects of bringing a dog into the justice system, and I'm going to be talking about dogs like Molly, what makes her act like this, and this is what she does in the courtroom. We bring her as a demonstration because this is her skill. Other than snuggling, she lies there.
I know it looks underwhelming, but you will find out that this is very hard work for a dog to do. So take it from us. She's working right now. All right, anything else,
No,
Celeste?
you just-
All right. Sir, could you turn off one of the lights in the back there? I think it might be better to see some of our videos. Can you still see us? Fine? Okay, great. All right, so this is our website, and most of the information we'll be talking about can be found on our website. And there's Miss Molly, who's the most important member of our team. And this is Seattle, and this is where this particular idea originated. I went to law school at the University of Oklahoma. My husband was from Seattle, and I was just thrilled that we were going to settle here. I had been a juvenile probation officer before I went to law school, and all I wanted to be was a prosecutor when I was in law school. So I felt very, very fortunate to be doing this job. It meant a lot to me. Just felt like I was out there protecting vulnerable people. And trying my best to make a difference in the world. But what I didn't really appreciate is the emotional trauma that exists during the course of the investigation and prosecution of crimes. You see it on TV a lot, and the witnesses crying or there's people shouting, and you just don't respond to it because it just seems very normalized. And I have to admit that, that's the way I felt initially and dealt with what I saw and experienced during most of my career. So I'm going to illustrate, though, to you some clear examples of how damaging this process can be. And the first one is this case that happened in 2010. This is the courthouse that I worked at in Seattle. And it is 12 stories high, and that is a sky bridge that's, erupting out of the top level of the courthouse, and it spans 2 blocks. And that sky bridge is used to transport inmates from the jail 2 blocks away over to the court for their court hearings. And that will figure prominently in this story. This is a case where a young woman when she was a teenage girl, was sexually assaulted by a man, and there were a number of other young women or teenage girls that were raped by him, and he threatened to harm all of them if they ever cooperated with the police. But eventually this came out. He was arrested, and he decided that he was going to represent himself, and defendants do have that constitutional right to do so. But when the prosecuting attorney met with her, and she was the first witness testifying in this particular case, he told her that he was going to be representing himself and that she should be prepared for the fact that he could come from behind counsel table and get within a few feet of her while he was cross-examining her. And when she heard that, she left the courthouse and went to the roof, or left the courtroom, went to the roof of our courthouse and walked along that sky bridge for 3 hours, threatening to kill herself. And that just shut that part of the city down as a result of this. People were watching this going on for hours outside their office buildings. So the police were able to convince her to come down. And when she did, she told the deputy prosecutor, I can't do this. And that charge had to be dismissed. And the trauma, the emotional trauma that exists in legal proceedings impacts everyone, because just a few days later on that month, there was a young man who suffered from bipolar disorder, who violated the conditions of his release. And he knew that the judge was going to sanction him after he'd been picked up on the warrant. And when he walked across that sky bridge and went into the 12th floor courtroom, and the judge said, "You're going back to prison," rather than do so, he threw a chair through that window and leapt to his death and fell at the park right outside our courthouse. So this is an example of what goes on there, and how when these things were happening, I really wasn't impacted on this. Even this particular case, where a woman who was pregnant was in court with her two friends trying to get a restraining order from her husband, and he came to court that day. This was before there was any sort of security screening at all, with a gun, and shot and killed them all. This is a memorial that's on one of the entries ways into our courthouse. But it wasn't until this case that I was personally affected by what was going on. I was thrilled to death to be assigned to this case. I was going to be the junior prosecutor. This was a death penalty case. This man had multiple convictions for sexual assault, and while he was on work release, he kidnapped this young woman who worked right within a block of our courthouse, and he raped her and killed her and dumped her body into a park in probably 2 or 3 miles away from the courthouse, where she was found several days later. And as I said before, I was just so excited to be involved in this particular case. And for some reason, I felt like I would be a better prosecutor if I got to know Diane personally, Diane Balashotis. And so I talked to her parents, I went to her home, I talked to her brother, sister, co-workers, and I felt like I really knew this woman. But when it came time for me to go to the medical examiner's office, and the ME pulls out photographs of her body where the skin around her face is eaten away and there is a skull present, and her pearl necklace is in perfect order, the way it was when she had a picture of herself taken that very morning that she was murdered. I just said, I gotta go. I can't look at this anymore, and I can't take part in this. And partner, you're gonna have to be doing direct examination of the medical examiner, because I really can't handle this. So it was a very, very emotionally draining case that impacted me, that gave me nightmares, that made me look at my 6-month-old daughter in the bathtub thinking, well, what if she grew up to be 24 years old and was murdered in this way? So I just assumed it was the cost of doing business, but the reason why we're here is because it doesn't have to be that way. And with some determination, you too can make this a better process for everyone. So I'm turning this over to Celeste to explain why this works.
Right. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, because I know a lot of you are in the animal law community. But I wanted to tell you that this isn't just based on some sort of gimmick, bringing dogs in. There's a lot of scientific evidence now. Those of you in the front row, or those of you who can see Molly lying here, believe it or not, you have a lower heart rate and lower blood pressure just because there's a calm, relaxed dog in your field of vision. That's just scientifically true. Humans and dogs have been together for so long that we have almost co-evolved. We've certainly adapted to each other's presence. For instance, a lot of research shows that people sleep better when they have a pet dog, because they know that dog's gonna let them know if somebody knocks on the door or somebody breaks into the house. So part of your brain can go, I'm just gonna turn that over to the dog. And conversely, when the dog is quiet and not vigilant, you feel a sense of safety that nothing else can replicate for us. I'll guarantee you, if Molly leapt to her feet and looked at that cracked open door and barked and stiffened up, everybody would look around behind them to see what it was, because we would know she heard something that we didn't hear. So just by the nature of her just lying there and being calm, she's helping us all feel like this is a home-like environment. And this works in the courtroom. This is a picture of drug court in Kitsap County, Washington, and that dog's name is Karis. And during drug court, Karis's job is not to be necessarily with one specific person, but to just lie there underneath counsel table. Sometimes she's up in the jury box, just hanging out. And interestingly enough, the judge here tells us that the attorneys behave better when the dog is in the courtroom. And I think it does make, it gives everybody something in common. The dog's quiet, it's kind of like being at home. You're not going to get mad at each other quite so easily. And we really, really multiply that peaceful impact of the dog when we let someone touch the dog. It turns out that when we have a child that has to come to a forensic interview, we all really want to do it like this, right? With their mom sitting beside them, you know, with their arm around the child. But we can't do it that way. You can't do therapy with an assaulted child, David, with their mother there, because we don't know who's been involved. And it turns out the dog's a really legally neutral way to raise the person's oxytocin level and serotonin level almost as much as if they had a family member or close friend next to them. And so this is a really important thing. People say, why can't we just use the dog sitting out there? And that's some help, but it's really helpful to children and other vulnerable individuals if you can let them touch the dog. And these dogs, we'll be talking later about their training, they're able to stay very calm and not interact with and distract children, but just lean on them and put their head in their lap and be there for them to stroke. And so on our website, there's a lot of scientific articles. I hate to talk in front of David about science because he actually reviews our scientific articles for us. But he recently sent us a new list, several pages long, of articles that reflect the facts that I've talked about here. And Ellen, do you want to talk a little bit about how you had this idea?
Yes, so actually today is this baby's 35th birthday. I had Sean my second year of law school, and much to, it was very devastating when he was born that he was born with severe brain damage. I was exposed to a common virus called cytomegalovirus, which is very similar to Zika virus, and it did a great deal of brain damage. So Sean can't speak. He can't eat, he's tube fed, he has no fine or gross motor control. He's dependent upon people for all of his care. And it was really hard to believe when he was just this little baby that was going to be his future. But he just had an incredibly winning personality. And that smile has been there all along. This is Sean in elementary school when he was going to the pumpkin patch. And then he went to our local high school and was very popular with the cheerleaders there. And thanks to, great thanks to the man that was his aide at the high school there. Because of Joe, he went to the prom, had a date, Joe went with his wife, and it was just so heartwarming to see how beloved Sean was. And I have to say that in terms of showing how someone like Sean can make a huge difference in the world, when he graduated from high school, it was a huge high school, big stadium, all the graduates were, there on the field. It seemed like 700 or so high school students' names were called, and Sean's was the last one. And when Joe pushed him across the aisle to get his diploma, all of the seniors stood up and started clapping for him. And then all of the parents and family members and friends in the stadium started clapping and standing up for him. And it was a really sad occasion for me because I knew Sean wasn't really graduating from high school going on to bigger and better things. But it really made me realize that how someone like him can have a huge impact on people. So it went from those high school students and their family members to him being responsible for this innovation. When he graduated from high school, we got him a service dog to be with him. And my husband and I were trained on how to give Jeter, that's the dog's name, commands on behalf of Sean. And I saw immediately how much it enriched his life, but it also made everybody more receptive to Sean and calmer and pleasant. And I had learned at the assistance dog school that they also placed facility dogs to work with professionals to enhance the work that they do. And so I thought, well, that I'd never heard of that. And by this time, I had been working as a prosecutor about 18 years, and I was working in juvenile drug court at that time. And I thought, a dog like Jeter could be a great help there. So it just so happened that there was one day a week when Jeter could not be with Sean because of our care arrangements for Sean. I asked the juvenile court judge if Jeter could come to court because, when I first started off, defendants were bad guys that needed to be put away. After 8 years of drug court, I realized these people were really suffering too, especially these teenagers that came from really dysfunctional families. And so I thought it would be nice for a dog like Jeter to be there instead of being at home for 10 hours a day. And so he made a huge difference, especially in this young woman's life. This is Chelsea, and she credits Jeter being there for her success in drug court. And this was such a special thing that the local television news did a story about Chelsea and Jeter.
So, congratulations, Chelsea. For these teenagers, today's graduation from drug court offers a second chance at life.
This is the first success ever for me, and I'm just very proud of myself.
16-year-old Chelsea Jaden was stealing cars, addicted to drugs, and almost dropped out of the drug court program.
Jeter, let's go.
But then she met the most unlikely character who encouraged her to stick with it.
The chances were I was going to get terminated from drug court because I wasn't doing good at the time, but the presence of dogs, and they're, loving animals just makes me feel more comfortable.
I think Jeter provides unconditional love.
Prosecutor Ellen O'Neill Stevens started bringing Jeter, her family's companion dog, to court last October.
It's probably takes them by surprise to see a prosecutor with a cuddly dog and coming up to them. And so it's kind of bridged that gap between the roles that I play and brings out more of the team effort that we're all trying to help these kids get their addictions.
Jeter's guys and easy demeanor can calm almost any nervous newcomer. Even the judge says he gives the adults a new way to connect with at-risk youth.
When they warm up to the dog, it seems to transfer to the rest of the court process as well, and I think we get more buy-in in that way.
The dog's presence has been so positive, prosecutors are now planning to include facility dogs at interviews with children, the elderly, even sexual assault victims. Chelsea Jaden may be leaving drug court, but she says she'll be back to visit.
I'm going to have to come see him. Absolutely.
So, I thought that was great. And word finally got out, despite my efforts to try to convince the prosecutors on the Special Assault Unit to apply for one of these dogs. I started getting these phone calls. Well, do you think Jeter could help, our kids? And I said yes. And this one particular deputy prosecutor had a case where twin girls, sisters, were sexually assaulted at age 6, 7 by their father. And they would not talk to him. They would not cooperate with the investigation, but it was going to court. And he wanted to know if I thought Jeter could break the ice. And so I said I thought he could. And so actually the first time we met the girls, Aaron and Jordan, and their mother we had Joan and Jeter along with us for that introduction. So they became very relaxed, were able to talk with the prosecutor, and ready to go to court until he brought them to the courtroom. They saw the witness box and they just broke down in tears, and that was over. So the prosecuting attorney asked the judge if it'd be okay if Jeter came into court. And the judge said, well, what do you think, defense attorney? And she said, well, I don't have a problem with that. He can't be real cute or be in costumes or anything like that, but I'm okay. So I thought, well, okay. And the next thing I knew, Jeter was going to go into court. And so it was a remarkable experience. I was there in the gallery, in the front seat, making sure that everything went okay. And the first sister testified, and she got through that pretty well. Their mother couldn't be in court, but Jeter was kind of right up there with them, and she felt safe and secure. But then when Jordan was asked to testify, she just could not get out the words to describe what happened. And prosecutors have to have these witnesses articulate intimate details about what happened. And she wasn't going to talk about her private parts. And I noticed Todd was getting very anxious that she wasn't responding to the questions. So he went over to Jeter and started patting his head. I was like, oh, this is reducing his stress, that things aren't going his way. And then he had a light bulb go up over his head, and he said, Jordan, does Jeter have private parts? And she said, yes. Well, would you show the jurors Jeter's private parts? And she said, I'll do that. And then Todd looked at me and was like, well? And so I got Jeter and put him in a stand position in front of the jurors while she pointed to his private parts, and the look on his face, as he was looking at me, I just can't believe you did this to me. And I'm thinking, Jeter's demonstrative evidence, this is just crazy. So she got through that. And their mother was really very appreciative of how his presence there in the courtroom made a difference. And so we had someone visiting with us, and we wanted to capture this experience for this family by interviewing their mother. And we did this on her back porch with Sean and Jeter off in the wings, and this is what happened.
The girls had a lot of advocates going through this. Nikki was, I like to say that she was mom when mom couldn't be there, because she was there from the beginning, established the rapport, took them when mom wasn't mom, because I too was a witness to the whole thing. So she was there for them in that regard. And then where she couldn't give anymore is where Jeter came. And she couldn't give what Jeter could. Just an extra layer of support on the level that the girls welcomed. She was warm and loving, and a mother herself, and the girls picked up on that, and I